sections today. And so we've been talking about the Civil War. And so I'm going to read a couple of sections out of here, and then I'm going to tell you like the title and show you the pictures first, and we're going to talk about what we think is going to be in the section, and then I will read the section and we'll talk about if we were right or not. So I'll do the first one. So the first little passage is going to be about the Underground Railroad. And so my prediction was that this is about a way that the slaves escaped from their owners, and I think it was a form of underground transportation. The slaves would escape to the Underground Railroad until they could make their way up north. So now we're going to read it and see if I was right. You are fifth graders. Yeah, sorry. White opponents of slavery called abolitionists organized their resistance in the 1820s and 1830s. Early leaders were clergymen and Quakers, members of a pacifist sect called the Society of Friends. One such leader was the Reverend Lyndon Beecher, father of Uncle Tom's Cabin, author Harriet Beecher Stowe. Another was Levi Coffin, a Quaker from North Carolina. Coffin left his home in 1826 and set up an operation in the Free State of Ohio. That became the Underground Railroad. This was a system of secret trails that ran from the northernmost slave states through New England or the upper Midwest to Canada. Escaped slaves linked up with guides or conductors at locations that they had heard about from other slaves. Conductors led the escapes along the trails and stopped to rest at stations, the homes of abolitionists. One famous conductor was ex-slave Harriet Tubman. At its best, the railroad liberated only about 1,000 slaves a year, but its very existence and the silent cooperation of thousands of Northerners angered slave owners greatly. When anti-slavery militant John Brown led a terrorist raid on Harper's Ferry, Virginia in 1859, pro-slavery Southerners felt their fears of the abolitionist movement were justified. Okay, so was my prediction right?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so now we're going to do one together over women at war. What page was that? Okay, and I'll show you the pictures and we'll make predictions together about what we think it's going to be like. So what do we think the women did while at war or while the men were at war? Does anybody have any ideas? They worked. What?
Farm work.
Yeah, they did some farm work. Anyone else have any ideas?
They cleaned. They did the housework.
Did housework?
Nurses.
All right, let's find out. In the 1860s, around the globe, laws and customs prohibited women from taking part in war. But in America, there was a different attitude. For generations, women had endured the dangers of the frontier. They had supported their men in wars against the British, Mexicans, and Native Americans. In those conflicts, most soldiers were volunteers. When they went off to battle, they left the women behind to look after farms, businesses, and communities. At those times, women were often called on to bear the burden of men's work, as well as the work traditionally considered their own. They proved they were tough. Men still did not want women to face flying bullets and cannon shots in the Civil War, but they did accept them taking part in war off the battlefield. Though their numbers were small, women played a role in support work and Union and Confederate government departments. Some were spies, while most Army nurses were men. Women were allowed to serve as hospital volunteers. Regiments of upper-class soldiers sometimes supported a vivandier, a uniformed female mascot, who marched with the troops and performed camp chores. In the North, many women belonged to the Sanitary Commission. This was an organization that traveled to the field with supplies for soldier relief. So we talked about women being working on the farm, and it said in here that they worked in the farm. And we talked about them being nurses, and it says although most nurses were men, most of them were just hospital volunteers, but they still helped with that stuff. So now we're going to do another section on our own, and then we'll share them. So we are going to go to the Life of Freedom. Okay, so Life of Freedom. So you guys can look at the pictures and kind of try to figure out what, and just write like 2 or 3 sentences on what you think it's going to be about.
Good job. Okay, so I'll flip this back over since nice try, purple team. Go ahead, orange.
you doing?
Recording your students?
Well, you know what it is now. Good job. Oh, sorry.
Does everyone have their predictions? All right, who wants to share? Britt, do you want to share?
I think it'll be about the freeing of slaves and how it happened and who was involved.
Okay, good job. Anybody else want to share?
But that is not ours.
Slaves being free, not serving the white people, and living on their own.
All right, so let's find out. A life of freedom. After more than 200 years of bondage, America's slaves were freed when the 13th Amendment to the U.S. Constitution was passed in December 1865. However, by then, slavery was already dead. More than 6 months had passed since the last fight of the Civil War. Across the South, Black Americans wandered the countryside looking for a new start in life. To deal with these estimated 4 million people, the federal government established the Freedom Bureau. This agency set up villages to house and feed refugees and schools to educate them. Meanwhile, opportunistic Northerners, called carpetbaggers because they usually carried their few possessions in suitcases made of carpet material, tried to gain the political support of freedom. Former slaves had been given voting rights under recently passed laws. To win their votes, some carpetbagger politicians said black voters might get 40 acres of land and mule to start their own farms. This cruel lie created false hope among the displaced southern blacks. Many of them returned to their former masters' plantations and worked there again as poorly paid employees. Some headed for the western territories or northern cities. Others helped rebuild the South to make it a good home for themselves and their families. So Caitlin and Britt both said that it was about slavery and who was involved and how it happened. And so then in the passage it told us that the 13th Amendment was passed in December of 1865, and so that's when slavery was officially abolished, but it had already ended 6 months before that. And then it talked about what happened after they were freed and how they lived afterwards.
Yeah, you guys almost like